I'm Allison, 32 years old and the owner of a thriving interior design business I built from scratch. 3 years into my marriage with David, I thought his mother Patricia was genuinely supportive of our relationship and my career. That illusion shattered when she cornered me with an impossible demand: pay her $200,000 or risk losing both a crucial contract and her son. Standing my ground cost me dearly, but taught me everything about family, business, and self-respect. Before I tell you how my mother-in-law tried to use my love for her son as leverage in our business relationship, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to make a tough choice between family and business. My journey to business success wasn't handed to me on a silver platter. I grew up in a modest home in Traverse City, Michigan, where my parents worked multiple jobs to keep our family afloat. From an early age, I learned the value of hard work and determination. My father worked at the local factory, and my mother cleaned houses while also working part-time at a grocery store. They instilled in me the belief that with enough grit and perseverance, I could create my own path in life. College was a financial struggle, but a dream I refused to abandon. I juggled 3 part-time jobs while maintaining a full course load at Michigan State University. Mornings at a coffee shop, evenings waiting tables, and weekends doing administrative work at a small interior design firm. That weekend job sparked something in me that I couldn't ignore. I found myself staying late, absorbing everything I could about the business, fascinated by how spaces could be transformed with the right vision. After graduation, instead of seeking employment at an established firm, I took a risk that terrified me. With $5,000 saved and a small business loan, I launched Allison Barrett Interiors from my tiny apartment. Those first 2 years were brutal. I worked 18-hour days, sometimes wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. My first clients were friends who needed budget-friendly design help, then friends of friends, until word of mouth slowly built my reputation. 7 years of relentless work later, I had transformed that struggling one-woman show into a respected firm with 15 employees, a beautiful downtown office space, and a roster of clients that included some of the most prestigious names in our region. I specialized in creating spaces that were both functional and emotionally resonant, earning recognition for my ability to truly understand what clients needed, even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. I met David at a business conference in Chicago where I had been invited to speak about entrepreneurship. He approached me after my presentation, not with the usual networking small talk, but with thoughtful questions about how I balanced creativity with the practical demands of running a business. Something about his genuine interest and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled made me agree to coffee afterward. David was an architect with his own modest but growing practice. We connected immediately over our shared creative fields and entrepreneurial spirits. What struck me most was how he listened, truly listened, when I talked about my business challenges and dreams. Unlike previous relationships where my ambition had been viewed as a threat or an inconvenience, David seemed genuinely excited by my passion and success. Our dating phase was refreshingly supportive. He understood late nights and working weekends. He celebrated my victories as if they were his own and offered perspective when I faced setbacks. His architectural background complemented my interior design focus, and we often bounced ideas off each other, strengthening both our professional work and our personal bond. The first time I met Patricia was at a dinner David arranged about 6 months into our relationship. He had spoken warmly about his mother, describing her as a retired business executive who had broken glass ceilings in corporate finance during the 80s and 90s. I was actually excited to meet a woman who had succeeded in business during a time when it was even harder for women than it is now. Patricia was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit when we met at an upscale restaurant. Her silver hair was styled in a sophisticated bob, and her posture exuded confidence. Her first words to me were, "So you're the designer David can't stop talking about," followed by a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Still, she seemed interested in my work, asking thoughtful questions about my business model and growth strategy. Looking back, There were subtle warning signs I chose to ignore. The way she referred to my business as your little company, despite knowing its size and success. Her casual suggestions about what I should be doing differently, delivered as helpful advice but carrying an undertone of criticism. When I mentioned a challenging client situation I had successfully navigated, she patted my hand and said, "Well, when you've been in business as long as I have, you'll develop better strategies for avoiding those situations altogether." David didn't seem to notice these undercurrents, beaming with pride as his mother and girlfriend appeared to hit it off. When I mentioned some of my observations on the drive home, he assured me, "Mom can come across as a bit direct, but she's impressed by you. She's just trying to be helpful." Our wedding was a beautiful autumn ceremony at a historic venue I had actually designed for a client who generously offered it for our use. Patricia was involved in the planning, sometimes a little too involved, with definite opinions about everything from the seating arrangements to the menu. During the reception, I overheard her telling a family friend, "Allison's business is doing quite well for her age. With the right guidance, she could really make something of it." The comment stung, but I brushed it aside, determined not to let anything diminish the joy of marrying the man I loved. The early years of our marriage were largely happy, though Patricia's interest in my business seemed to intensify. She began stopping by my office, just to say hello, when she was downtown. During holiday gatherings, she would corner me with questions about my profit margins and growth projections, information I wasn't comfortable sharing widely. She introduced me to her friends as my daughter-in-law who runs that interior design business I've been mentoring. When I expressed concern to David about these interactions, he seemed caught between loyalty to his mother and understanding my discomfort. "She's just proud and wants to help," he would say. "Business was her whole life, and now that she's retired, I think she misses it." I understood that explanation and tried to be compassionate, maintaining polite boundaries while appreciating that she was important to David. Little did I know that Patricia's helpful interest was laying groundwork for something far more calculated than I could have imagined. The balance I thought we had struck was about to be severely tested, and the true nature of her interest in my business would soon reveal itself in ways that would threaten everything I had built, both professionally and personally. The invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon. David called me at the office, his voice tinged with excitement. "Mom wants to take us to dinner at Everett's tomorrow night. She says she has something important to discuss with us." Everett's was the most expensive restaurant in the city, known for its exclusive clientele and month-long waiting list for reservations. "Did she say what it's about?" I asked, already feeling a flutter of unease. "Just that it's a business opportunity she thinks will benefit all of us," David replied. She sounded really enthusiastic about it. I agreed to the dinner, pushing aside my instinctive caution. After all, Patricia had decades of business experience. Perhaps she had a genuine opportunity to share, a connection or insight that could be valuable. David was clearly excited about his mother wanting to help us, and I didn't want to dampen that with my vague misgivings. The next evening, we arrived at Everett's to find Patricia already seated at a corner table, a bottle of expensive champagne chilling beside her. She stood to greet us, kissing David warmly on both cheeks before offering me a brief embrace that felt more ceremonial than affectionate. "I took the liberty of ordering this to celebrate," she said, gesturing to the champagne. "The beginning of what I believe will be a fruitful new chapter for all of us." Throughout the appetizer course, Patricia kept the conversation light, asking about our recent vacation to Maine and commenting on the restaurant's acclaimed new chef. The unusual formality of the occasion hung in the air, emphasized by the way. Patricia kept checking her designer watch and the leather portfolio folder placed neatly beside her plate. David squeezed my hand under the table, his expression a mix of curiosity and anticipation. As our main courses arrived, Patricia finally opened the portfolio and pulled out several documents printed on heavy cream-colored paper. "Allison," she began, her voice taking on the measured tone I imagined she had used in corporate boardrooms. "I've been watching your business grow over these past few years, and I'm impressed with what you've built. But I also see tremendous untapped potential that, with the right guidance and resources, could be realized." She slid one of the documents across the table toward me. It was a professionally designed business proposal, complete with graphs and projections. "I'm proposing a partnership," Patricia continued. "I'm prepared to invest $150,000 into Allison Barrett Interiors in exchange for a 40% ownership stake." I nearly choked on my water. 40% was an enormous portion of the business I had built from nothing, through years of exhausting work and personal sacrifice. "That's incredibly generous, Mom," David said, looking genuinely surprised and pleased. Patricia smiled. "It's not just about the money, of course. My connections in the business world would open doors that might take Allison years to access. Otherwise, my experience would help avoid costly mistakes. And," she added with a pointed look at me, "as family, our interests are naturally aligned." As she outlined her vision for our company, alarm bells rang louder in my head. Patricia spoke about strategic changes she would implement, new market segments she believed we should target, even staff restructuring she thought necessary. She was essentially describing a complete overhaul of the business I had carefully crafted, positioned as necessary improvements. "This is a lot to take in," I finally said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I appreciate your interest and the offer, but I'd need time to consider something this significant." Patricia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, dear. Though I should mention that several other small design firms have approached me about potential investment. I'm focusing on you first because you're family, but I can't keep the others waiting indefinitely." "There are other designers approaching you for investment?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. It seemed oddly coincidental. "You'd be surprised how word gets around in business circles when someone with my background shows interest in a particular industry," she replied smoothly. Then, turning to David, she added, "Your father always said, 'Opportunity doesn't knock twice.' That's how we built our success, by recognizing good opportunities when they presented themselves." The pressure tactic was subtle but clear, invoking David's late father and implying that hesitation on my part might be failing the family legacy. David looked uncomfortable, clearly torn between his natural inclination to trust his mother's business acumen and his respect for my autonomy with my company. "Why don't we agree to discuss this more in a week?" David suggested, attempting to navigate the tension. "That gives Allison time to review the proposal properly and maybe consult with her business advisors." Patricia acquiesced with apparent grace, though I noticed how she emphasized to the waiter that the expensive meal should be charged to her account, since we're celebrating a future business partnership. The message was clear. The dinner itself was meant to establish a sense of obligation. On the drive home, David was uncharacteristically quiet. When I asked what he was thinking, he sighed deeply. "I'm honestly torn," he admitted. "Mom has always had amazing business instincts, and that kind of investment could really accelerate your company's growth. But it's your business, Allison. You built it, and you need to make this decision based on what feels right to you." I appreciated his support, but could sense his hope that I would accept his mother's offer. The idea of his mother and wife working together clearly appealed to him, a harmonious blending of the two most important women in his life. The next morning, I called my longtime business mentor, Rachel, and arranged to meet for coffee. Rachel had guided me through several critical business decisions and knew my company almost as well as I did. When I described Patricia's proposal, her expression grew increasingly concerned. "A 40% stake for that investment amount significantly undervalues your company," she pointed out. "And more importantly, have you researched her previous business partnerships?" I hadn't, an oversight that now seemed naive. With Rachel's Guidance. I spent the next few days investigating Patricia's business history. What I discovered was disturbing. Patricia had indeed been successful in corporate finance, but her post-retirement investments told a different story. I found 3 small businesses where she had acquired significant ownership stakes, only to push out the original founders through various pressure tactics within 2 years. In each case, she had leveraged her controlling interest to force decisions. That benefited her position, even when they contradicted the founding vision of the company. I also consulted with my business attorney, who flagged several concerning clauses buried in Patricia's proposed agreement. One would give her effective veto power over any business decision involving more than $10,000. Another would allow her to bring in additional investors without my approval, potentially diluting my ownership even further. With each piece of information, my gut feeling solidified into certainty. This partnership would be disastrous for everything I had built. Patricia didn't want to support my vision. She wanted to control it, reshape it, and ultimately make it hers. The question now was how to decline without creating a family crisis that would put David in an impossible position. The follow-up meeting with Patricia took place at my office. I had chosen the location deliberately, wanting to be on my own territory for what I anticipated would be a difficult conversation. I had prepared a gracious but firm response, rehearsing it several times to ensure I could deliver it calmly. Patricia arrived precisely on time, dressed in another impeccable business suit, this one a muted charcoal gray that somehow conveyed both authority and understated wealth. I had asked my assistant to hold all calls and ensure we wouldn't be interrupted. "Thank you for coming," I began after we were seated in my private office. "I've given your proposal serious consideration, and I'm genuinely touched by your interest in my company." Patricia smiled with apparent warmth, though her eyes remained watchful. "After careful thought and consultation with my advisors, I've decided that taking on a partner isn't the right direction for Allison Barrett Interiors at this time," I continued. "While the investment would certainly provide growth capital, I believe the current structure best serves our clients and our team." I had expected immediate pushback, perhaps even anger. Instead, Patricia's expression shifted to one of understanding, almost maternal concern. "I respect your decision, Allison," she said, surprising me. "Building something meaningful requires a clear vision, and you've obviously thought this through carefully." Relief washed over me. Had I misjudged her intentions? Was she truly just trying to help, however misguided her approach might have been? "I hope you know my offer came from a place of genuine belief in your potential," she continued. "And family supports each other in many ways. There are other ways we might work together that wouldn't require such a formal arrangement." Something in her tone gave me pause, but I chose to take her words at face value. "I appreciate that, Patricia, and I value your experience and insights." As she gathered her belongings to leave, she paused at the door. "David mentioned you're hoping to expand into hospitality design. That's a challenging sector to break into without the right connections." Her smile remained pleasant, but her eyes had hardened slightly. "Fortunately, connections are something I have in abundance." The comment lingered in my mind after she left. It hadn't been explicitly threatening, but something about it felt vaguely ominous, as if she were reminding me of what I had just declined. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a shift in Patricia's approach. Instead of direct involvement with me, she began showing up at my office unannounced, often when I was out at client meetings. My staff reported that she would walk around, asking questions about current projects and offering unsolicited advice. "Mrs. Harrington suggested we should reconsider the material selection for the Westlake project," my junior designer mentioned one afternoon. "She said she knows the client personally and thinks our choices are too contemporary for their taste." "Did she actually say she was speaking for me?" I asked, alarmed. "Not exactly, but she definitely gave the impression she was involved in the decision-making process." This was just the beginning. Patricia began calling my vendors, introducing herself as a principal advisor to Allison Barrett Interiors, asking for pricing information and delivery schedules. Several longtime industry contacts called me, confused about whether they should be coordinating with Patricia instead of me. Meanwhile, David reported that his mother had been raising concerns about my business decisions during their weekly lunches. "Mom thinks you're taking on too many small residential projects instead of focusing on larger commercial work," he mentioned casually one evening. "She says it's limiting your profit potential." When I asked if he had explained that our business model deliberately balanced larger and smaller projects to maintain consistent cash flow, he looked surprised. "I just assumed she had discussed it with you directly." The situation began affecting our marriage. Arguments that had never existed before cropped up regularly, often centered around Patricia's suggestions that David would innocently relay. I found myself becoming defensive about business decisions I had previously been confident in, while David seemed increasingly torn between supporting me and respecting his mother's experienced perspective. After a particularly heated disagreement where David accused me of being irrationally suspicious of his mother's motives, we agreed to try couples therapy. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, helped us identify the boundary issues at play and facilitated conversations about family dynamics that we had never fully addressed. "Your mother's business experience is valuable," I acknowledged during one session, "but when she speaks to my staff or vendors without my knowledge, it undermines my authority and creates confusion." David nodded slowly. "And I need to stop. Being the messenger between you two, it puts me in an impossible position." We emerged with a tentative agreement. David would speak with his mother about respecting professional boundaries, and I would make an effort to include Patricia in appropriate business discussions where her experience might be genuinely helpful, like our monthly strategy lunches. This fragile peace was tested when an extraordinary opportunity landed in my inbox. The Meridian Hotel Group was planning to renovate their flagship property in our city, a historic building that would be transformed into a luxury boutique hotel. They were inviting select design firms to bid on the interior spaces, and somehow, Allison Barrett Interiors had made their shortlist. This was exactly the kind of high-profile hospitality project that could elevate my firm to the next level. I assembled my team immediately, canceling other appointments to begin research and concept development. We worked late into the night for a week straight, creating preliminary designs that would showcase our ability to honor the building's history while infusing it with contemporary luxury. 3 days before our presentation to the Meridian executives, David mentioned something that sent a chill down my spine. "Mom seems to know Edward Keller personally," he said, referring to the notoriously private owner of the Meridian Group. "She said they served on a charity board together years ago. Isn't that a coincidence?" It seemed like far too much of a coincidence. Did she just happen to mention this? David shrugged. "It came up when I told her about your big presentation. She said she might give him a call to catch up." I tried to keep my voice casual. "Did she say why she would call him now specifically?" "Just that she could put in a good word for you. I thought you'd be pleased." I wasn't pleased. I was alarmed. The timing, Patricia's sudden connection to the exact hotel owner whose project could transform my business, the casual offer to put in a good word after I had declined her partnership proposal, all felt calculated rather than coincidental. My suspicion grew when I learned from my assistant that Patricia had requested a copy of our Meridian presentation to review before the meeting. She had claimed I had asked her to look it over, which was completely untrue. Later that evening, I received a text from an industry colleague. "Saw your MIL having coffee with Edward Keller at the Capitol Grill today. Thought you two weren't working together." The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was deeply concerning. Patricia wasn't just overstepping boundaries now, she appeared to be actively inserting herself between my firm and a potentially transformative opportunity. But why? What could she possibly gain from interfering this way? The answer would come soon enough, in a form more explicit and shocking than I could have anticipated. The call came at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of a team meeting, finalizing details for the Meridian presentation scheduled for the following day, when my assistant knocked quietly on the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but Mrs. Harrington is on line 1. She says it's urgent and can't wait." I excused myself, puzzled by the timing. Patricia rarely called my office directly, preferring to drop by unannounced or communicate through David. "Patricia," I answered, closing my office door behind me. "What can I do for you?" "Allison, dear," she began, her voice carrying that artificial warmth I had come to recognize. "I've just had the most illuminating conversation with Edward Keller. Such a dear old friend." My stomach tightened. "Oh?" "Yes, we had quite a lengthy discussion about the Meridian renovation. Edward values my opinion highly, you know. We go back over 20 years. The implied message was clear, but I refused to take the bait. "That's nice. I'm actually in the middle of preparing for our presentation tomorrow, so if there's something specific—" "There is, actually," Patricia interrupted. "I think we should meet in person to discuss how I can help ensure the Meridian contract goes your way. Shall we say Riverside Coffee Shop in an hour?" Everything in me wanted to refuse, to tell her I didn't need or want her help with the Meridian project. But professional curiosity and concern for what she might have already said to Keller won out. Fine, 1 hour. The Riverside Coffee Shop was Patricia's choice, not mine. A quiet, upscale establishment frequented by business executives rather than the creative professionals who typically populated my world. I arrived exactly on time to find Patricia already seated in a secluded corner booth, an untouched cappuccino in front of her. "Allison? Thank you for making time," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I know how busy you must be with such an important presentation tomorrow." I declined the server's offer of coffee, wanting nothing to prolong this meeting. "What's this about, Patricia? What did you say to Edward Keller?" Patricia's practiced smile didn't falter. "Direct as always. It's what I admire about you professionally, though it does lack a certain finesse." She took a small sip of her cappuccino before continuing. "Edward and I had a wonderful catch-up. He mentioned the Meridian project, and naturally I shared that my daughter-in-law was among those being considered." "And what else did you share?" I pressed, certain there was more. "I simply provided context about your firm that Edward found valuable. The perspective of someone who understands both you and the level of client Meridian represents." "What kind of context?" Patricia set down her cup with precision. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you. You see, Allison, I'm in a unique position to influence Edward's decision-making process. My endorsement carries significant weight with him." The implication hung in the air between us, and I felt a cold anger beginning to build. "Are you suggesting that whether or not my firm gets this contract depends on your recommendation?" "I wouldn't put it quite so bluntly, but essentially yes." Her expression shifted to something more calculating. "Business is about relationships, Allison. Always has been. And I have a relationship with Edward that predates your entire career." "What exactly do you want, Patricia?" I asked, my voice low but steady. She reached into her designer handbag and removed a folded document, sliding it across the table toward me. "A consulting agreement. Quite standard, really. $200,000 for my services in securing the Meridian contract for Allison. Barrett Interiors." I stared at the document, momentarily speechless. "You want me to pay you $200,000 for talking to your friend?" "For leveraging my considerable influence and business reputation on your behalf," she corrected smoothly. "The Meridian contract is worth millions. Consider it an investment in your future." This is... I struggled to find words that wouldn't burn the bridge entirely. "This is highly inappropriate, Patricia. You're my husband's mother. We're family." Her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Family supports family, Allison. I've offered you multiple ways to include me in your success. You've rejected them all. Now I'm simply proposing a straightforward business arrangement." And if I refuse? Patricia shrugged elegantly. Then I can't in good conscience recommend your firm to Edward. In fact, given some of the concerns I have about your operation's capacity to handle a project of this magnitude, I might feel obligated to share those reservations. The threat was unmistakable. I felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. Are you seriously threatening to sabotage my business if I don't pay you? I prefer to think of it as clarifying the value of my connections, she replied. Then, her voice dropping slightly, she added, David has always respected my business judgment, Allison. He values family loyalty. I would hate for this situation to force him to choose between us. And there it was, the real ultimatum, laid bare. Pay me $200,000 as a consulting fee or forget getting this contract, and possibly forget my son too. I stood up, gathering my belongings with hands I forced to remain steady. I'll need to think about this. Don't think too long, Patricia said, checking her watch. The presentation is tomorrow, and Edward will be making his decision very soon after. I'll expect your answer by this evening. I walked out of the coffee shop in a daze, barely making it to my car before the tears came. Not sad tears, but tears of rage and betrayal. How could someone use their own son as leverage in a business extortion attempt? What kind of person threatened their child's marriage for financial gain? I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel as I processed what had just happened. When the initial shock subsided, I called my best friend, Tara. She did what? Tara exclaimed after I recounted the meeting. That's not just crossing a line, Allison. That's criminal. It might be unethical, but I'm not sure it's actually illegal, I said. And even if it were, can you imagine what pressing charges against David's mother would do to our marriage? What are you going to do? It was the question I had been asking myself since walking out of that coffee shop. I took a deep breath. I'm going to fight, but I need to be smart about it. Are you going to tell David? Not yet, I decided. I need to process this and make a plan first. If I tell him now, in the state I'm in, it will just force him to choose sides immediately. And that's exactly what Patricia wants. I called my business attorney from the car, scheduling an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Then I contacted my friend who had seen Patricia with Edward Keller, asking for any details he could remember about their interaction. Finally, I drove back to the office, determined not to let Patricia's manipulation derail the presentation we had worked so hard to prepare. My attorney, Kevin Bennett, listened carefully to my account of Patricia's proposal, taking detailed notes and occasionally asking for clarification. This is textbook influence peddling with a side of extortion, he said when I finished. The question is whether you want to treat it as a legal issue or a family issue. I want to protect my business without destroying my marriage, I replied. Is that even possible? Kevin thought for a moment. I suggest a two-track approach. First, document everything. Forward me any emails, text messages, or other communications from Patricia that relate to your business. If you speak with her again, consider recording the conversation, which is legal in this state with one-party consent. And the second track? Reach out directly to Edward Keller. Request a brief meeting before your presentation tomorrow. Don't mention Patricia or any concerns. Simply introduce yourself personally and express your enthusiasm for the project. Establish your own relationship, however brief. Won't that seem presumptuous? Kevin shook his head. In my experience, clients appreciate initiative and direct communication. Keep it brief, professional, and focused on the project. The goal is to create your own connection, independent of Patricia's influence. As I drove home that evening, I crafted my strategy carefully. Patricia's ultimatum had drawn a line in the sand, one that I could not cross without compromising everything I believed about business ethics and personal integrity. But confronting her directly would only escalate the situation before the crucial presentation. I decided not to respond to Patricia's demand that evening. Instead, I would focus entirely on making our Meridian presentation the absolute best it could be, while simultaneously following Kevin's advice to establish my own direct line to Edward Keller. The confrontation with Patricia and the inevitable, difficult conversation with David would have to wait until after we had given ourselves the best possible chance at winning the contract fairly. What Patricia had failed to realize was that her ultimatum hadn't weakened my resolve, it had strengthened it. In attempting to control me through fear, she had inadvertently clarified exactly what I was fighting for. Not just a contract, but the integrity of the business I had built and the future of my marriage based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. Early the next morning, I emailed Edward Keller's assistant, requesting a brief 15-minute meeting before our scheduled presentation. To my surprise, she responded within the hour, offering a 7:30 a.m. slot at Mr. Keller's office. This would give us a private conversation before the formal presentation to the entire Meridian executive team at 9. I arrived at the Meridian Group's downtown headquarters at 7:15, bringing only my portfolio and a small model we had created of one of the hotel's signature spaces. The security guard directed me to the top floor, where I was greeted by a poised executive assistant. "Mr. Keller is finishing a call. He'll be with you shortly," she informed me, offering water or coffee, which I politely declined. My nerves were already firing on all cylinders. Caffeine was the last thing I needed. At precisely 7:30, the massive oak doors to Edward Keller's office opened. He was a tall, imposing figure with a full head of silver hair and piercing, blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive. "Ms. Barrett," he said, gesturing to a seating area rather than the intimidating desk that dominated one side of the corner office. "My assistant mentioned you requested this meeting. I must say it's unusual for a presenting firm to seek a private audience beforehand." "I appreciate you making the time, Mr. Keller," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I wanted to personally express how honored we are to be considered for the Meridian renovation. This project represents everything, our firm values, respecting architectural heritage while creating spaces that serve modern needs." Keller nodded, his expression neutral. "Your firm's portfolio is impressive, though your experience in hospitality is somewhat limited. What makes you think Allison Barrett Interiors is the right choice for a project of this magnitude?" I had anticipated this question and responded with confidence, highlighting specific elements of our approach that address the unique challenges of historic hotel renovation. As I spoke, I opened my portfolio, showing him preliminary sketches we had developed specifically for this meeting. "These are quite thoughtful," he commented, studying the drawings with genuine interest. "You've captured something essential about the building that some of the other firms missed entirely." Our conversation flowed naturally from there, focusing entirely on design philosophy and project vision. Keller was clearly knowledgeable and passionate about architecture, asking insightful questions that allowed me to showcase our team's capabilities. As our 15 minutes drew to a close, I decided to address the elephant in the room as diplomatically as possible. "I understand you know Patricia Harrington," I said. "She mentioned you had spoken recently." Something flickered across Keller's face, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "Yes, we served on the Arts Council board together years ago. She reached out rather unexpectedly last week, mentioned she was connected to one of our presenting firms." "Patricia is my mother-in-law," I explained. "While I value her business experience tremendously, I want to be clear that she's not affiliated with Allison Barrett Interiors in any professional capacity." Keller's eyebrows rose slightly. "Interesting. She gave me quite a different impression. Spoke as though she had some advisory role in your firm." "That's not the case," I said firmly. "Our presentation today represents the work and vision of my team alone." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Appreciated the clarification, Ms. Barrett, and thank you for this preview. I look forward to your full presentation. The formal presentation went exceptionally well. My team executed flawlessly, and the Meridian executives asked engaged, positive questions throughout. Edward Keller remained inscrutable, but I caught him nodding appreciatively several times during our detailed explanation of how we would approach the historic ballroom restoration. When I arrived home that evening, exhausted but cautiously optimistic, about the presentation, I found David waiting with a troubled expression. "Mom called," he said without preamble. "She said you met with her yesterday and were incredibly rude. Something about rejecting her help with the Meridian project? She was really upset, Allison." The moment of truth had arrived sooner than I had anticipated. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. "We need to talk about your mother," I said, setting down my bag and sitting beside him on the couch. "What she told you isn't the full story." Over the next hour, I recounted everything: the consulting agreement, the thinly veiled threats about the contract, and finally, the implied ultimatum regarding our marriage. I showed him the document Patricia had given me, with its outrageous fee structure and vague deliverables. David's expression cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally, a reluctant anger. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Mom wouldn't threaten our marriage. She wouldn't use me as leverage." "I wish that were true," I replied gently. "But she specifically said she would hate for this situation to force you to choose between us." Those were her exact words, David. He stood abruptly, pacing the living room. "I need to talk to her directly, get her side of this." "Of course you do," I agreed. "I would expect nothing less." What I didn't expect was for him to grab his keys immediately, muttering that he needed space to think. He spent that night at his friend Mark's apartment, leaving me alone with my thoughts and fears. Had I just destroyed my marriage by standing up to Patricia's manipulation? The next morning, Patricia escalated dramatically. My phone began buzzing with notifications before 7 a.m. She had called my office repeatedly, leaving increasingly agitated messages with my assistant. There were 6 text messages, ranging from conciliatory, "I think we've had a misunderstanding," to threatening, "You've made a serious error in judgment." By midday, she had shown up at our house, apparently unaware that David wasn't there. Finding me alone, her carefully maintained facade cracked. "What exactly did you tell my son?" she demanded, standing rigid in our entryway. "The truth," I replied simply, "that you asked for $200,000 to use your influence with Edward Keller, and implied our marriage would suffer if I refused." "That is a complete mischaracterization," she hissed. "I offered you valuable business consulting, and you've twisted it into something sordid. No wonder David left." The manipulation was so transparent it would have been almost comical if it weren't so harmful. "David needed space to process what he learned about you. He'll be back." "Will he?" Patricia raised an eyebrow. "He called me this morning, absolutely devastated. He said he's questioning everything about your relationship, wondering what else you might have been dishonest about." I felt a chill, despite knowing this was almost certainly another manipulation tactic. "I suggest you leave now, Patricia. Any further communication should go through our respective attorneys." Her eyes widened. "Attorneys? You would sue your husband's mother? That will certainly end your marriage quickly." "I'm not threatening litigation," I clarified. "I'm establishing a boundary. What you did was inappropriate and potentially illegal. I won't discuss it further without legal representation." After Patricia left, I called David, who didn't answer. I left a voicemail asking him to contact me when he was ready to talk, assuring him that I loved him and was committed to our marriage, regardless of what his mother might claim. 3 tense days passed with minimal communication from David. Just brief texts confirming he was okay but still needed time. On the 4th day, Patricia made her most dramatic move yet. She organized what she called a family intervention at her home, inviting David's siblings and their spouses. David called to tell me about it, his voice weary. Mom has asked the whole family to gather tonight. She says she's concerned about us and wants everyone's support. Will you come? Every instinct told me this was a trap, a public forum where Patricia could control the narrative and position me as the villain. But refusing would only reinforce whatever story she had been spinning about me. Of course I'll come, I said. We're in this together, David. The scene at Patricia's elegantly appointed home was exactly as I had feared. David's sister Amanda and her husband, his brother Michael and his wife, all seated in the formal living room with grave expressions. Patricia had positioned herself in the center, the concerned matriarch orchestrating her children's lives. Allison, David, thank you for coming, she began once we were seated. I've asked everyone here because I'm deeply concerned about what's happening between you and how it's affecting our family. For the next 20 minutes, Patricia delivered a masterfully constructed narrative about her genuine desire to help my business, my suspicious and ungrateful response, and her heartbreak at seeing David caught in the middle. She even produced emails and notes from conversations with Edward Keller, presenting them as evidence of her well-intentioned efforts on my behalf. David's siblings exchanged concerned glances, clearly having already accepted their mother's version of events. Amanda reached over to squeeze David's hand supportively, while Michael nodded along with Patricia's account. When she finally finished, all eyes turned to me. The room hummed with tension, everyone clearly expecting either a dramatic denial or tearful confession. Instead, I remained calm. Thank you for sharing your perspective, Patricia. Now I'd like to share mine, if everyone is willing to listen with an open mind. Without raising my voice or making accusations, I methodically presented the facts. The initial partnership offer that significantly undervalued my company, the escalating boundary violations, and finally, the explicit demand for payment in exchange for influence. I showed them the consulting agreement Patricia had prepared, with its exorbitant fee structure and vague deliverables. I have built my business on integrity and authentic relationships, I concluded. I cannot and will not compromise those values, even for family, especially for family. The room fell silent. David's brother Michael was the first to speak. Mom, is this contract accurate? Did you really ask Allison for $200,000? Patricia's composure slipped momentarily. The fee was commensurate with the value I was providing. Edward Keller is a personal friend. My introduction and endorsement alone would have guaranteed the contract. So you did ask for the money, Amanda clarified, her expression shifting from support to concern. It was a legitimate business arrangement, Patricia insisted. Allison is being deliberately obtuse about how these things work. David, who had remained silent throughout both accounts, finally spoke. Mom, did you tell Allison that this situation might force me to choose between you two? Patricia's eyes darted between her son and me. I merely pointed out that family loyalty is important. Which it is. That's not what I asked, David pressed, his voice firm but controlled. Did you imply that my marriage would be at risk if Allison didn't agree to your terms? The momentary hesitation before Patricia's denial was all the confirmation David needed. I watched as something fundamental shifted in his expression, a painful recognition dawning. I think we've heard enough, he said quietly, standing and extending his hand to me. Allison and I need to talk privately. As we left Patricia's house, her carefully orchestrated family intervention collapsing behind us, I felt the first real hope that our marriage might survive this crisis. David had witnessed his mother's manipulation firsthand, seen the inconsistencies in her story, and chosen to walk out with me rather than remain in that toxic environment. The road ahead would still be difficult, but that single moment of clarity had changed everything. Sometimes the breaking point is actually the beginning of something stronger. David and I barely spoke during the drive home, both processing the intense confrontation we had just experienced. When we finally reached our house, he sat heavily on the couch, looking more exhausted than I had ever seen him. "I owe you an apology," he said after a long silence. "I should have believed you immediately. I should never have left." I sat beside him, taking his hand. "You needed time to reconcile two impossible versions of reality. One where your mother, who you've trusted your entire life, was manipulating both of us, and another where your wife was misrepresenting the situation. I don't blame you for struggling with that." "But I should have known," he insisted, his voice breaking slightly. "This isn't the first time she's done something like this. There were incidents with my college girlfriend, with my first job. I just never wanted to see the pattern." Over the next few hours, David shared stories that suddenly made Patricia's behavior toward me make sense. She had systematically interfered in his previous relationships, always under the guise of protecting him or providing guidance. She had convinced him to turn down a promising architecture position in another city because she claimed to have insider knowledge about the firm's financial troubles, which later proved entirely fabricated. "It's always been about control," he realized aloud. "She creates scenarios where her help seems necessary, making people dependent on her judgment, her connections, her approval." As dawn broke, we had reached a clear, mutual understanding. David would establish firm boundaries with his mother, making it explicitly clear that any further attempts to interfere in our marriage or my business would result in a complete break in their relationship. Meanwhile, I would focus on protecting my company from any potential fallout from Patricia's actions, particularly regarding the Meridian contract. "We're a team," David affirmed, looking more certain than he had in weeks. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The next day, I met again with my attorney to implement the protective measures we had discussed earlier. First, we formally documented Patricia's attempted extortion, including the written consulting agreement and my detailed account of our conversations. This documentation wasn't for immediate legal action, but rather as insurance against any future interference. I'd also recommend sending her a formal cease and desist letter, Kevin advised. "It establishes a legal record of you explicitly, asking her to stop her behavior, which strengthens your position if further action ever becomes necessary." The letter was carefully worded, professional rather than accusatory, but with unmistakable clarity about the unacceptable nature of Patricia's actions and the potential consequences of continuing them. Next, I took the difficult but necessary step of informing key clients and industry partners about the situation. I didn't share all the personal details, but simply explained that Patricia Harrington was not affiliated with Allison Barrett Interiors in any capacity and any claims to the contrary should be reported to me immediately. We also implemented enhanced security measures at the office, including a visitor management system that would prevent Patricia from accessing our workspace unannounced. My assistant was instructed to direct any calls or emails from her to our legal team. David, meanwhile, had the painful task of confronting his mother directly. He chose to meet her at a neutral location, a quiet park where they had often walked when he was younger. He returned from that meeting looking drained, but resolute. "She denied everything at first," he reported, then tried to justify it as protecting me from a wife who clearly doesn't value family. When neither worked, she broke down crying, saying she was just trying to help and couldn't understand why everyone was being so cruel to her. "The victim shift?" I murmured, recognizing the classic manipulation tactic. "Exactly. I told her I needed space from our relationship until she could acknowledge what she did and seek professional help. She said I was breaking her heart and that you had turned me against her." Though he didn't show it openly, I knew how deeply. This rift with his mother wounded David. He had always been close to his family, and despite recognizing Patricia's manipulative behavior, severing that connection caused him genuine grief. True to form, Patricia refused to accept the boundaries David had established. She began calling his friends and colleagues, spinning a narrative about me isolating him from his family. She showed up at his office unannounced, creating scenes that embarrassed him professionally. When these direct approaches failed, she turned to social media, posting vague but pointed comments about toxic daughters-in-law and businesses built on family connections then discarded. She even attempted to contact several of my employees directly, offering them better opportunities if they would share internal information about our current projects. Thankfully, my team's loyalty remained steadfast, with each person reporting these inappropriate approaches immediately. The most concerning development came when a potential client canceled our initial consultation, explaining awkwardly that they had heard some concerning things about our business practices. Through industry contacts, I learned that Patricia had been systematically approaching people in our network, suggesting that Allison Barrett Interiors was facing financial difficulties and potential litigation. Through all this, we maintained our professional focus. The Meridian presentation had gone well, but weeks had passed without word on their decision. I tried not to obsess over whether Patricia's relationship with Edward Keller had damaged our chances, instead channeling my energy into other projects and opportunities. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Edward Keller's office called to schedule a final meeting with the Meridian executive team. My heart raced as I confirmed the appointment, unsure whether this was a courtesy rejection or something more positive. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning. I prepared thoroughly, bringing updated materials and responses to the questions that had been raised during our initial presentation. David offered to accompany me for moral support, waiting in a nearby coffee shop while I attended the meeting. I was shown into the same conference room where we had made our original presentation, but this time only Edward Keller and his chief operating officer were present. Their expressions gave nothing away as I took my seat across from them. "Ms. Barrett," Keller began, "we've reviewed all the presentations carefully and had extensive discussions about the direction of this project." I nodded, maintaining my professional composure despite my racing heart. "During our evaluation process, I received several communications regarding your firm," he continued, his expression neutral. Some quite positive, others raising supposed concerns. This was it, I thought. Patricia's influence had worked against us. "I generally don't appreciate outside attempts to influence our business decisions," Keller said, a slight edge entering his voice. When I mentioned this to Patricia, "Harrington, she became quite insistent about her perspective on your firm's capabilities." I took a deep breath, preparing to respond diplomatically, when Keller continued. "That kind of pressure usually has the opposite effect of what's intended. We base our decisions on merit, not personal relationships or backroom arrangements." He slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside was a contract offering Allison Barrett Interiors the Meridian renovation project in its entirety. "Your presentation demonstrated the perfect balance of respect for our building's heritage and vision for its future," the COO explained. "The decision was unanimous among our executive team." Relief and vindication washed over me in equal measure. "Thank you for your confidence in our team. I can assure you it's well placed." As we discussed next steps and timelines, Keller added one final comment. "I've been in business a long time, Ms. Barrett. I recognize manipulation when I see it. Whoever tried to interfere in this process did you no favors, but they also revealed something important about your character. The way you handled yourself throughout spoke volumes." When I met David at the coffee shop afterward, contract in hand, the celebration in his eyes matched my own. This victory wasn't just about winning a prestigious project, it was about prevailing, through integrity rather than manipulation, about standing firm in our values despite enormous pressure to compromise. That evening, we opened a bottle of champagne we had been saving for a special occasion. As we toasted our resilience and the exciting work ahead, I felt something shift within me, a newfound confidence in my ability to weather storms, both professional and personal. To doing the right thing, even when it's the harder path, David said, clinking his glass against mine. And to building a future based on truth, not manipulation, I added. The Meridian contract would transform my business in the ways I had always envisioned, opening doors to high-profile hospitality projects nationwide. But more importantly, the entire experience had transformed our marriage, revealing both its vulnerabilities and its remarkable strength when tested under pressure. The months following the Meridian contract decision were challenging, but ultimately healing for both our marriage and my business. David and I established a new normal that included very limited structured contact with Patricia. The initial, complete separation gradually evolved into occasional, brief interactions during major family events, always with clear boundaries and expectations. David began working with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and maternal narcissism, gradually unpacking the patterns that had shaped his relationship with his mother throughout his life. Some sessions were so difficult that he would return home emotionally drained, needing to simply sit in silence while processing painful realizations about his childhood. I keep remembering incidents that seemed normal at the time, he shared. One evening, like when I won a scholarship to architecture camp at 16, and Mom convinced me not to go because those programs never lead to real opportunities. I found out later she had already planned a family vacation during those weeks and didn't want to change it. These revelations were difficult for David to accept, challenging the narrative he had constructed about his childhood and his mother's motivations. There were days when grief overwhelmed him, mourning not just the current rift, but the relationship he had always believed they had, now revealed as something quite different. For my part, I focused intensely on the Meridian project, channeling my energy into creating exceptional work that would justify the faith Edward Keller had placed in us. The hotel renovation became our firm's showcase project, with the first completed spaces earning features in several prestigious design publications. This exposure led to inquiries from other hospitality groups interested in our approach to historic properties. Within 6 months, we had secured 2 additional hotel projects, necessitating the hiring of 5 new team members and expansion into additional office space. The business success was gratifying, but even more meaningful was the way my team had rallied during the crisis with Patricia. Not a single employee had been tempted by her offers or intimidated by her interference. Instead, they had closed ranks, protecting both me and the company we had built together. I recognized this loyalty by implementing a profit-sharing structure that gave long-term employees a financial stake in our continued success. David and I celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary with a weekend trip to a lakeside cabin, deliberately choosing somewhere private and peaceful rather than the elaborate celebrations we had planned in previous years. Sitting on the dock at sunset, we reflected on how the past year had changed us. I think we're stronger now, David said, his arm around my shoulders. Not despite what happened, but because of how we handled it together. I leaned into him, feeling the truth of his words. There were moments I was afraid we wouldn't make it. Me too, he admitted. Especially those first few days when I was staying at Mark's place, trying to reconcile 2 completely different versions of reality. But deep down, I think I always knew which version was true. We had learned to be more intentional about protecting our relationship, scheduling regular date nights and weekend mornings with phones turned off, creating space for connection amidst our busy professional lives. We also developed clearer communication strategies, addressing potential issues directly before they could fester into larger problems. The most challenging aspect of our new normal was navigating family holidays and celebrations. David's siblings had eventually recognized Patricia's manipulative behavior, particularly after she attempted similar interference in Amanda's marriage when her husband received a job offer in another state. However, they were not ready for the complete separation that David had initially implemented. After much discussion, we developed an approach that allowed David to maintain relationships with his extended family while protecting our boundaries with Patricia. We would attend major family gatherings for limited periods, with agreed-upon exit strategies if Patricia's behavior became problematic. David would sometimes visit family members individually, building relationships independent of his mother's influence. The first Thanksgiving after the confrontation was particularly tense. Patricia oscillated between playing the victim, making subtle digs about my business, and attempting to monopolize David's attention. We stayed for exactly the 2 hours we had planned, politely but firmly departing despite protests and guilt trips. That was exhausting, David acknowledged on the drive home, but also empowering. We set our boundary and maintained it. By Christmas, a new pattern had emerged. Patricia, realizing that her usual tactics no longer worked with David, adopted a carefully pleasant facade in our presence. The underlying tension remained, but outwardly, a fragile peace prevailed. Professional therapy proved invaluable for both of us during this period. David's individual work helped him process his complicated feelings about his mother, while our couples sessions focused on strengthening our communication and united front. Our therapist, Dr. Martinez, helped us recognize when we were being drawn into unhealthy dynamics and provided practical strategies for maintaining boundaries without unnecessary conflict. The Meridian Hotel renovation progressed beautifully, eventually becoming the signature achievement I had hoped for. The opening gala for the completed property was attended by design professionals and media from across the country, with Allison Barrett Interiors receiving widespread recognition for our thoughtful integration of historic elements with contemporary luxury. Edward Keller himself sought me out during the event, champagne glass in hand. "You've exceeded our expectations, Allison," he said, gesturing to the restored grand lobby around us. "This space feels both timeless and entirely fresh. Exactly what we hoped for." "Thank you for taking a chance on us," I replied. "This project has been transformative for my firm." Keller nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the most impressive credentials aren't on a resume, but in how someone handles adversity. Your grace, under pressure, was as impressive as your design talent." His words stayed with me long after the gala ended. The Patricia situation, painful as it had been, had revealed something essential about my own character and resilience. I had faced a direct threat to both my business and my marriage, and instead of compromising my values for an easier path, I had stood firm in my integrity. That realization became central to how I approached both personal and professional challenges going forward. I found myself making decisions with greater confidence, trusting my instincts in situations where previously I might have second-guessed myself. This newfound assurance translated into bolder creative choices in my design work and more authentic leadership within my growing company. David noticed the change as well. "You've always been strong," he commented one evening as I recounted successfully navigating a difficult client situation. "But now you know your strength. That makes all the difference." As we approached the 1-year mark since Patricia's ultimatum, David and I had a serious conversation about starting our own family. We had always planned to have children eventually, but the experience with Patricia had raised complicated questions about family dynamics and patterns. "I worry about repeating cycles," David admitted. "What if I have blind spots about parenting?" Because of how I was raised? It was a fear I understood. "The fact that you're asking that question already puts you miles ahead," I reminded him. "We'll be conscious parents, aware of the patterns we want to break." We decided to continue our therapeutic work while beginning to plan for a family, committed to creating a home environment built on honesty, respect, and unconditional love rather than manipulation and control. The business continued to thrive, with the Meridian project opening doors I had once only dreamed of entering. We were featured in national design publications, invited to speak at industry conferences, and approached about potential projects in cities across the country. I carefully managed our growth, prioritizing quality over quantity and maintaining the core values that had defined Allison Barrett Interiors from the beginning. Patricia remained a peripheral figure in our lives, neither fully estranged nor truly reconciled. She never acknowledged or apologized for her attempted manipulation, instead creating a revisionist narrative in which she had only ever tried to help and had been unfairly maligned. We accepted this as part of who she was, maintaining necessary family connections without expecting genuine change. What surprised me most about the aftermath was how the experience had clarified my own values and priorities. The crisis had burned away indecision and people-pleasing tendencies, leaving behind a clearer sense of what mattered most to me: integrity in my work, authenticity in my relationships, and the courage to protect both, even when doing so came at a personal cost. Looking back on that fateful coffee shop meeting where Patricia had delivered her ultimatum, I realized that in attempting to control me through fear, she had inadvertently set me free. By forcing me to choose between my integrity and an easier path, she had helped me discover just how much that integrity was worth to me. More than any contract, more than approval, more than the comfort of avoiding conflict. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time, even when they're family. The hardest boundaries to set are often the most important ones for your future happiness. I had learned this lesson the hard way, but it had changed everything for the better. Have you ever had to choose between maintaining peace and standing up for yourself in a family business situation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the most painful experiences teach us the most valuable lessons. If you found value in my story, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. And remember, protecting your boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for building a life and career with integrity. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to honor your own worth in every relationship.